There's one question that every human being has asked themselves. And that question is, where do I come from? Is there a creator? What if I could tell you that I can unequivocally answer this question for you? That I can prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that there has been something for all of time. In turn, eliminating the idea from your mind that everything came from nothing and proving that there is a creator. Now, what if I could tell you that I don't have to use philosophy to do this? I can point you to a scientific experiment that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's a creator. You're going to sit here and call me crazy. However, I'm going to sit here and do just that for you. Do yourself a favor and just think about what I'm saying, because it may seem complicated at first. However, by the time I am done, I am going to prove to you that the only logical conclusion is that there was something for all of time, and that something led to our creation. It's the only logical outcome after looking at this experiment with open eyes and an open mind, and then just use logic from there. First, we have to start with the double slit experiment. Now, I'm pretty sure all of you are familiar with what the double slit experiment is. Now, basically, in that experiment, they took beams of light and they shot them through two slits. Now, what they soon realized is that if you put photon detectors on these slits and fire the light through the slits, okay, you will see particles of light on a photosensitive plate behind the slits, correct? Now, if you turn those photon detectors off, you'll see a wave pattern, okay? Now, this confused the hell out of scientists because they're like, well, why the hell does it act as a wave and a particle? And not only that, but when we have a photon sensor there, it's almost as though this beam of light knows that it's being observed. Now, what this does is it complicates things immensely, because it more or less would lead somebody to believe that light is conscious of the fact that it's being observed. Now, what's very interesting is, if you do this same double slit experiment and you eliminate the photon detector, and let's say you place a fish, and you have the fish observing the light, well, guess what happens? The light shows up as a particle. It doesn't show up as a wave. So that means the being observing this light doesn't even have to be conscious, or at least how we would think of consciousness. Now, here's where things get very, very, very interesting, because up until now, we don't understand what's going on, right? We have no idea. So we're going to take the next step in this experiment, okay? And they wanted to find out exactly what was going on to understand why this interference pattern was showing up if there was no observer. However, if there was an observer, you could finitely detect, where that particle of light was going to be projected on that photosensitive plate, right? So enter the quantum eraser experiment, okay? Now, basically, the quantum eraser experiment proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that an observer is not needed in order to make that beam of light show up as a particle. I'm going to tell you exactly how they determined this. So what they did is they set up an apparatus that shot two beams of light around a table, okay? And what they did was, they sent them to different portions, different places, okay? Now, basically, they had these two beams hit a prism, and it shot these two beams in different directions. So what they would do is they would take two different lights, right? And they would fire them at the same prism, and this prism would take those two lights and it would separate them and shoot them off in different directions. So there was no way that the plate that they were hitting would know which light source the original light came from, because they were hitting a prism and splitting, okay? Now, they also had a detector on the same path that would intercept the different light sources, and you would be able to tell where the source came from. Now, this is where things get very, very interesting. When the light that you didn't know where the source came from, so after it went through the prism, when it hit the detectors, it would show up as a waveform. So there was no observer, because there was no way of knowing which light was hitting which target. However, this is where things get interesting. If you put a receiver and you shoot the same beam of light in a different direction at the same time, right? You use the same beam of light, the same two beams of light, but you have a detector that can pick up which beam it is prior. So you shoot this from the device, it hits the original target, and it shows up as a particle, okay? But you know where the light source is coming from that was split. This is where things get interesting. So when that light source splits and it hits the second targets, does it show up as a waveform like it did originally because there was no information? No. This is where things get wicked fucking interesting. What this experiment did was prove that you don't need an observer, okay? Because you can run this experiment with nobody in the room at all. Now, if you don't have the detectors that intercept that light before it gets to the prism, it will always show up as a waveform. However, if there is a sensor there to detect which light source is going through the prism and going to which target, it'll show up as a particle. So what that told the scientists was, unequivocally, it doesn't matter whether or not you have an observer in the room. If the information is possible to be known, you will always be able to determine which light source hit which target, okay? It'll always show up as a particle. It'll never show up as a waveform, which tells you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that if information exists, the outcome is already predetermined. So basically, what this was doing is it was telling you which plate the light was going to hit before the light hit it, because the information was already there. And this is wicked, wicked, wicked scary, because what this does is tells you that the past is dependent on the present. It's scary as fuck when you really think about it and break it down. So basically what this means is nothing can exist at all unless the information was already there. Basically, everything that you see in front of you was already predetermined. But the only reason you know that it was predetermined is because the information was already there. So that makes you think, is there any free will? Is there any God? Well, yes, by necessity, there has to be a God, because the information has to be there in order for us to process it. The information has to come first. The information determines the outcome. Period. The end. There is no way that you should be able to fire a beam of light at a target, and just because it hits that target, it tells you the future of where it's going to land in the present. And now the thing is right, the original experiment was done where the detector that would tell you where the light source was going to go before it hit was only milliseconds beforehand. However, this experiment has been conducted over 1,500 kilometers, to the point where they're predetermining the location of the light that they're shooting by over 30 seconds. So they know which target the light is going to hit, 1,500 miles away, 30 seconds before it does. They're predicting the future by 30 seconds by using light. And what that tells you is that information determines the outcome of what light does. Now, if you apply this on a deeper level to everything and you trace it back to its origins, it dismisses the fact that you can't have something created from nothing, because the information for that something had to have preceded that something existing. Okay? So science in and of itself disproves the Big Bang. Period. Because the Big Bang is a law of thermodynamics violation. Okay? Now, the only reason that the example I'm giving you works is because it's outside of the natural world. Okay? Us having that information and being able to determine the future is not a natural phenomenon. That is supernatural. It's unexplainable. There's no way that we could ever come to grips as to why this is happening. Okay? But what that tells you is that there is a programmer. 100% there is a programmer. And without that information preceding anything, there is no outcome. Now, I understand that this is a heavy and hard concept for a lot of people to grasp. And I know I'm not the best at explaining how this experiment actually looks physically. But do yourself a favor and go look up the quantum eraser experiment. Because it proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is a creator. It's just logic. 100% logic. And there's no way for anybody to sit here and refute what I'm saying. Because that experiment is showing you things that shouldn't be possible in the natural world. That's all I got for you today, guys.